came up with a new idea. He connected a clock with a recording device to make a machine that became central to factory life, the clocking on machine. If ever the worker needed something to tell him, this was it. Time was money, speed was progress. The tempo of life had changed forever. This was the world of the Victorians. When Victoria came to the throne in 1837, life had hardly changed in hundreds of years. Most people lived in the country, at a pace dictated by their trudging workhorse. We live in a world of such constant change that it's hard to imagine how unchanging life used to be before the Victorian era. In those days, nothing travelled faster than a galloping horse, and it could take days to get to the next town. In fact, there was no incentive to travel, really, because you'd probably be working the land just like your father and your grandfather before you. Come on, Toby. Round we go. But if you were born a Victorian, things were going to be very different. All around, people were getting really excited about what they called progress, and they were delighting in an exuberance of speed. And for the first time, you might have seen something like this. Steam power was Victorian high technology and wonderfully simple. This is the firebox. And all the hot gases and smoke go along tubes through this, which is the boiler, where water is being turned into steam. Now the steam goes up into the brown working cylinder, and here it pushes the piston along. And the piston turns that big heavy flywheel, and the momentum of the flywheel pushes the piston back after the steam has escaped. And so the cycle continues. So all the smoke and steam goes up the chimney. And if I open the regulator a little and let more steam in, I can have more power. Just see how the speed picks up. This is Victorian high technology in action. Steam engines were invading the land. The horse was no longer the only source of power, and for many farm workers, life would never be the same again. Hi.
Hi.
So, what have we got here?
What we've got here is a Fowler twin-engine ploughing system, which was basically two traction engines, each of which have a cable drum underneath the boiler, and they would pull the implement across a field. One would pull, and then when it gets to this one, it would then get pulled back to the far one, and then back again.
How much difference did it make?
It speeded up ploughing a lot, from probably 1 acre a day up to about 20.
20? Wow.
A much faster system, yeah.
And that must have had other consequences as well.
You didn't need as many horses afterwards. There was a great decline in keeping horses, and presumably it must have led to unemployment because horses are very labour intensive. These machines, a set of ploughing engines would take 6 people to run it, but then you're doing 20 times as much as you would do with a horse.
You say it needs skill to drive this. Yeah. Could I have a go on the harrow?
Of course you can.
Good.
Now, as he starts pulling, start to go round, and start to rectify it.
Right.
Okay.
What do I have to pull the lever for?
To drop the tines back down.
Ah, right, OK.
Any problems, one hand in the air and just hope they stop.
Thanks. Spectacular. 6 see horsepower ploughing and not a horse in sight. Well, so far it's a piece of cake. Even I can do it. Oh, sorry. Well, I've done it again. Steam power was even changing the countryside itself. Fields got bigger as hedges were grubbed out to make way for the huge traction engines. But these engines also created unemployment. Labourers were pushed off the land, replaced by the much faster machines. But steam power wasn't just changing rural life. If you were living in a town, your whole world was being transformed before your eyes. In Victorian times, the population of small towns like Burnley doubled and doubled again. Streets like this had to be built incredibly quickly as all the people came pouring in off the farms to work in the factories. This is Queen Street Mill in Burnley. It's the only surviving steam-powered mill in the country. Officially, it was closed down in 1982, but in fact they've kept it open as a museum, and they still weave a little bit of very elegant cotton cloth here. Factories like this were products of the Industrial Revolution, but the explosion of industrial towns and cities was a Victorian phenomenon. Before the age of steam, if you wanted to build a factory, you had to build it where there was a natural source of energy, like a fast-flowing river, so that you could put in a water wheel. But once you had a steam engine, like this 500 horsepower monster which drives the entire mill, then you could build your factories anywhere. And the Victorians did. They built them right across the country. 100 years ago, there would have been 300 looms working in this single shed. There were 3 sheds in this single mill, and across Lancashire there were thousands of mills. Factories like this were establishing the modern world. Weaving had always been a traditional craft industry in Lancashire, but the idea of bringing hundreds of people together to work in one place was extraordinary. It must have been mind-blowing for people who'd been working out on the farm. But factory workers had to get used to new working patterns and new machinery. So, you're weaving cotton cloth from cotton thread, yes?
Cotton thread, yes. Cotton warp, cotton weft.
And the warp is the one going that way?
The warp goes from back to front. Right. And the weft is from left to right. Or, a good way to remember, by west to white. West to white.
Very good.
Yes.
Now, in real life, you'd be driving just one machine?
No, you'd be running from 4 to 6 looms.
6 looms?
6 looms, yes.
So you don't have a lot of time for sitting
no time whatsoever. You're constantly walking around what you call your set of looms. Right. Constantly. Yeah.
So you're driven by the machine?
You're driven by the belt. Yeah. The speed of the belt, that keeps you going all day long.
Wow. The Industrial Revolution turned time into a commodity. The pace of life was no longer controlled by the regular cycles of day and night, but by the machinery in the mills. If you were a factory worker, it was a double-edged sword. Unlike a farm worker, you had a secure and predictable income, but you paid a price. You had to toil regular set hours, dictated by the relentless pace of machines. Welcome to the rat race. For most Victorians, speed was drudgery. For some, excitement, and for one man, an obsession. In the 1870s, pioneering photographer Edward Muybridge was obsessed with capturing actions too fast for the eye to see. When he turned his attention to racehorses, he tried to answer a question that till then was unanswerable. When a horse gallops, does it ever have all 4 feet off the ground at the same time? His results were met with astonishment. Today, with the help of the Metropolitan Police and a team of photography experts, we're going to try and repeat Muybridge's experiment. Here we have 12 digital cameras mounted on this piece of handrail from the side of the field. And there are 12 cotton threads, each one of which goes through an eye, down here, and down to this bit of white coffee stirrer. Now, as the horse comes thundering up, it breaks through these threads, yanks out the coffee stirrers, and fires the cameras. Muybridge didn't have digital cameras, but he used exactly the same sort of low-tech shutter release. And the important thing is that as the horse comes galloping through, it takes its own photograph 12 times, one after the other. Our setup is as close as we can get it to Muybridge's original, photographed in 1878. What about the delay? Because the string, it's going to be cotton across the track.
That's right.
And that stretches.
We have done an experiment with one camera to get the timing right.
Right.
And so far, we've initially set up the cameras 2.5 metres from the start of the string. So by the time the string is stretched and breaks, and the time that the camera takes to react, that should be enough.
So it's 2.5 metre delay.
That's right.
Gotcha. While we give the cameras a few final tweaks, police horse Zamora and her rider Vicky Lane are warming up for the experiment. Perry, are all the cameras set?
We're all set, all ready.
We're ready to go. I think we're ready for the first run. Are you ready, Vicky? Go!
All the stirrers are out, John.
Did they all go off?
Well, we'll have to see.
Nope.
There's no picture.
No picture on that one.
I'm sure Muybridge didn't crawl along in wet grass. The horse is nearly out of frame there. No, there's one of the hind hooves is still just touching. A few adjustments, and we try again. This is the sequence. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Clearly the thing's working. And it would be possibly worth bringing the cameras closer together, but my guess is just have another go and see how it comes out. Can we make it better?
Definitely.
Okay, let's get on with it then.
Okay.
Muybridge spent years tuning his apparatus before he got it right, but we have only one day, and as we reset the equipment for another try, the first spots of rain appear. Luckily, the sky's cleared in time for one last attempt. It's very close, isn't it? Look at that. You can see, just about see that all 4 feet are off the ground now. That's what we want to see. You have a look and see what you think.
Oh, I'd say definitely.
And you can see that here we've got 2 feet on the ground, so on. There's feet on the ground all the time. Look at this one. Here, this is the exciting one. You've got all 4 feet off. You can clearly see white underneath the bottom hoof. Bit black though, sooty.
Oh, we can lighten that up.
You can?
Yeah.
If you can turn it more into a silhouette, then we can animate it, I think.
Yep.
We think it'll work?
Sure.
Just look at that picture. There is a photograph of Zamora with all 4 hooves off the ground at the same time in mid-gallop. Now, when Muybridge took pictures like this, nobody believed they were real. They were much too amazing. So he animated them with a simple machine like this. Just watch. I give it a push, and there is the horse galloping. Astonishingly convincing. You couldn't not be convinced by those pictures. So, galloping horse, and all you have to do is to freeze it on the right frame, and there we have all 4 hooves off the ground at the same time. This is the first time photographs like this have been taken of a horse galloping for 120 years. It's absolutely fantastic. Today, we take speed for granted. These London commuters, for instance, travel an average of 50 miles a day. The expectation that we can travel where we want, when we want, is another Victorian legacy, and it's mainly thanks to the Victorian railways. For the first time, a Victorian businessman, like this handsome gent here, could travel from London's Paddington Station all the way to somewhere like Bristol at incredible speeds of up to 60 miles an hour, not far short of the average speeds of today. But this rapid transit did give them some teething problems, not least when it came to telling the time. Because the Earth is turning through space, the sunrise in Bristol is actually 10 minutes later than the sunrise in London. And it used to be that Bristol time was 10 minutes behind London time. Now that didn't matter. When to get from one place to the other, you had to go on a horse, and it took days to get there. It's when you start travelling faster that your troubles begin. Because if people all over the country have got their clocks set to different times, what time do you use for your railway timetable? And what happens if you forget to set your watch to local time? Having your watch set to Bristol time in London could lead to some frustrating problems. So, in 1845, railway companies lobbied Parliament to get rid of local time. And we reap the benefits, enjoying standardised time right across the UK. When Victoria came to the throne in 1837, there were only about 500 miles of railway. But by 1850, there were 6,000 or 7,000 miles snaked all over the country, so that most of today's rail network was in fact conceived by Victorian engineers. And among those engineers, one of the greatest and certainly the most flamboyant was Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Brunel was a workaholic genius, obsessed by time, speed and technical advance. He built bridges, ships and the Great Western Railway. The 112-mile line to Bristol, completed in 1841, cost a massive £6.5 million and was a triumph of engineering. The greatest engineering challenge on the whole route was the Box Tunnel. 2 miles long, it took 1,200 navvies 2.5 years to dig. This is it. The scientific experts were sure it would be a disaster. The celebrated Dr. Dionysius Lardner said that if the brakes failed at that end, because it was going downhill, the train would emerge at Box, doing 120 miles an hour. And at this colossal speed, all the air would instantly be sucked from the lungs of the passengers, and they'd wind up dead. Thankfully, Dionysius Lardner was wrong, and Brunel was right. Even while he was building the railway from Bristol to London, Brunel had a much grander vision. He imagined a great ship that would pick the passengers up in Bristol and take them across the Atlantic. Then they could buy a ticket all the way from Paddington Station to New York. Who said that integrated transport is a modern idea? In fact, Brunel did realise his ambition. He built 3 great ships to speed passengers across the Atlantic. Today, only one of his ships survives. The SS Great Britain was a rusting hulk, abandoned for over 30 years before she was brought back to Bristol. And here she is, being restored to her former glory in the very dock where she was built. Absolutely wonderful. Before Brunel, no one had dared to suggest that you could go the whole way across the Atlantic on steam power alone. But he was convinced the only problem was the amount of coal, and if you built a big enough ship, you could carry enough coal. It was a simple idea, but a massive engineering challenge. Before the Great Britain, most ships had been built of wood, but that simply wasn't strong enough for a ship on this scale. The Great Britain was the first big ship to be made of iron.
This is the forward hold part of the ship. It's where cargo was stored in 1845.
It's huge, isn't it?
It's really beautiful, isn't it? You can really get an impression of the size of the ship.
Yes, it's wonderful. And here you can really see the ironwork of the hull. It is iron, is it?
Yes, it's wrought iron.
Right.
It was the largest they could make in 1843.
Which is how big?
It's about 6 foot from one plate end to another plate.
Oh, I see. And you can see where they're riveted together.
That's right. There are no 2 parts alike.
No 2 parts?
No, all the frames are spaced slightly differently apart.
amazing. So you mean nothing was standardised?
No, that's right.
So there must have been guys down here saying, hey, we want one 3 inches wider, you know, and then they beat it up.
That's right. Everything made to measure on site.
Wow. This has to be the engine room with all this stuff in here.
That's right, the largest engine of its day, 1,600 horsepower.
1,600?
And all fed from this boiler front here.
So these white doors are actually where the coal went in?
That's right. If you can imagine men shoveling 70 tonnes of coal per day into here.
70 tonnes a day?
That's right.
Wow, terrific. So that was making steam going into these...
Into this cylinder.
This is a cylinder?
It's
huge.
That's right.
It must be... Well, it's more than 6 foot across.
It's about 8 foot or over, just over 8 foot.
That is quite a piston, quite a cylinder. Wow, she's big, isn't she?
She's about 322 feet long from stem to stern.
Gosh, and how wide?
50.5 feet.
So you've got this vast deck, which presumably people sat around on deck chairs and had, you know, drinks brought to them.
Promenaded up and down,
Yeah.
and it was a luxury liner after all, and people enjoyed their time going over to America.
Now, she's a steamer, isn't she? So why does she have all these masts as well?
These were for auxiliary power. They were just to eke out the coal, make it more economical to run the ship.
I guess it would be very embarrassing if you ran out of coal, wouldn't it?
That's right.
Or if your engine failed or something. She is a lovely ship. Brunel was really pushing technology here. Not only had he built the biggest iron ship in the world, in fact a ship twice as big as any other ship, but he used a new form of propulsion. This was the first big ship in the world to be driven by a propeller. When the Great Britain was launched, the propeller was a brand new invention, and not everyone was convinced it would work better than the tried and tested paddle wheels. To quash all opposition, Brunel devised a trial of strength. He borrowed 2 identical ships from the Admiralty. The Alecto had paddle wheels, and he fitted the Rattler with a propeller. Then he organised a tug of war. We've decided to recreate that great experiment, and we've got our own 2 ships here. This is the Rattler, fitted with screw propellers, and this is the Alecto, fitted with paddle wheels. And we've got identical engines here in the shape of Scott and Tim, both from the City of Bristol Rowing Club. Now, we have to decide who's going to drive which boat. Call.
Heads.
It's tails.
I'll have that one, please.
So you're going to be the Rattler, you'll be the Alecto. Let's get these boats in the water. Now, we're ready to go. I've tied the 2 ships together, stern to stern, with my handkerchief in the middle to act as a marker. It's terrible conditions out here, strong wind, big waves. We're making the Rattler go upwind as an added handicap. So I think the paddles ought to drift down at huge speed. Now, chaps, are you ready? I just need the right gear on. Stand by. 1, 2, 3, row! There's hardly any movement yet. They're both struggling away like mad. No, the Rattler's beginning to win. They're heaving upwind. The screw propeller is actually towing the paddles backwards. Rattler is winning. Come on, Alecto. Heave. Work, work. No, there's no doubt about it. Rattler, I declare, Rattler the winner. Hooray for the screw propeller. Brunel's tug of war was just as convincing. The Rattler pulled the Alecto backwards at about 3 knots. Before long, most ships were built from iron and fitted with propellers. Before the great iron ships, travel across the Atlantic was really hazardous, only for the most intrepid traveller. But with the Great Britain, it became almost ordinary. Dickens went over to America for a reading tour, and Tchaikovsky went to conduct at the opening night at the Carnegie Hall in New York. Of course, today, if you're going there, you'd fly, but the fact is, the Victorians gave us international tourism. But remarkably, steam power wasn't confined to land and sea. One Victorian inventor even flew a plane more than 50 years before the Wright brothers. John Stringfellow hoped to build a plane the size of a modern airliner, and in 1848 succeeded in flying a scale model. It was the world's first powered flight. For the past 18 months, a team of engineers from Rolls-Royce in Bristol have been piecing together fragments of information to create an exact replica of Stringfellow's plane. It's been a formidable task. He built this 153 years ago. Which bits did he get right?
To get a structure such as this that was strong enough to fly was an absolutely marvellous achievement. He's pared everything down to the absolute minimum. If you look at the struts that are running across and the ribs that are running across, they're very thin, and if you shake them they'll wobble, but they're strong enough for flight. And the art of getting something to fly is to balance the weight of the machine against the lift that you can generate and against the thrust that you can generate. So putting all that together, again, we've got to say it's a remarkable achievement.
So, are you confident? Is it going to work?
If we can get enough power at the steam engine, then there's no reason why it shouldn't work.
Stringfellow's engine was unique. He made wafer-thin, conical boilers to minimise weight and to allow water to be rapidly heated from a flame held separately under the engine. But the design also brings problems. It's fragile and could fail or even explode. Even getting the engine to run smoothly is causing difficulties.
We've had problems with leaks and stuff like that, and bits of debris have been blown out and things. But other than that, I mean, the boiler side of it is fine. It's just getting the timing right on the piston.
Stringfellow's design was based on years of studying birds of all shapes and sizes to optimise the shape. But did he get it right?
In order for an airplane to be stable, we need to balance the lift forces of the wing with the lift force of the tail and the weight of the machine. And the way we're going to do that is to walk it gently across the hangar floor, speeding up on each successive run, going faster and faster. If we can get it to flying speed, great. If we can't, it doesn't matter. But in that process, we can feel what the airplane is doing. And then if we need to, we can rebalance and retwist the wings.
Having at last got the engine to run, the team have reached a critical point, putting the engine and the plane together. Well, it's been a long day, but finally we're getting very close to the first flight. The engine is in the gondola, the propellers are going on, they're just sorting out the bands, everyone's very tired, but tension is high, and in a few minutes we'll see that first flight. A serious problem has emerged. Well, she's all poised and ready to fly, hanging from the wire, but now they can't raise steam. There's some difficulty, we don't know what it is, they can't get the pressure up, and they can't get the props turning. We're just hoping they can iron it out in the next few minutes. The engine's failing to turn the propellers effectively, and after some investigation, the engineers agree it could take not minutes, but weeks to resolve. Having come this far, they decide to launch the plane anyway. Well, it was a very close thing. Unfortunately, they couldn't get the engine running when they had it on the wire. There wasn't enough steam or some other problem. It's very tricky. A fantastic achievement to have got this working at all. And remember, Stringfellow did it 153 years ago, 50 years before the Wright brothers, the first power flight. Just one more thing that those Victorians did for us. In the next programme, I'll be taking a trip to the world beyond to explore the Victorian obsession with life after death. And I'll also be looking at some pretty weird Victorian science. Meanwhile, if you'd like to find out more about the Victorians, there's loads to discover on the BBC History website.
New comedy on BBC One.
Welcome aboard the good ship QI.
What's the difference between flotsam and jetsam?
One is spelled with a J.
What's the ideal way to kiss a Frenchman?
With their consent.
What can you tell about a man from the size of his feet?
A rumour started by clowns.
You're running into danger.
What you don't know, Stephen Fry does. QI comes to BBC One with a brand new series tomorrow at 9.
classics music. Get an earful.
As his spiritual journey continues, Peter Owen Jones explores the faiths of the Far East.
Have it. Take it all. I don't want it anymore. It's like being a war correspondent, I think. It seems to be universal, this craving for the divine. This is here, happening now, in the midst of modernity.
Around the World in 80 Faiths continues tomorrow at 9 on BBC Two. If you missed the last episode, catch it now on BBC iPlayer.
Newsnight now on BBC Two with Kirsty Walk.